My name is Charles Chestnut. I was a lawyer for 5 years before I decided I'd rather be happy, so I quit. I've lived on the West Coast and the East Coast and both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. I've hiked the entire Appalachian Trail twice, and now I am a historian on the Mississippi River. History does not have to be boring. History does not have to be just a dry recitation of facts. History can be incredibly exciting and engaging, with amazing characters, plot twists, developments, everything. But history does not have to be centered around the great seats of power and the great cities. Sometimes the most interesting things to tell come from the out-of-the-way places. Sometimes the best stories come from all the wrong places. And that's where I'm going to go, to all the wrong places. All these freshwater bayous, saltwater marshes, bays, lagoons, inlets, swamps, and the Gulf coastal waters themselves are home to tens of thousands of species, and the Cajuns who try to eat all of them. Shrimp, fish, oysters, crabs, mussels, a full 30% of America's annual seafood harvest comes from right here. By weight, almost 1/3 of all of the seafood harvested in America is taken out of coastal Louisiana.
It's so weird. Donnie's little grandson come with us a couple times. I'm like, you ready? We're going over this deep water hole. And he's like, what you talking about? I said, the water right here is 160 feet deep. And it was like 178 that day we came. Man, we had some big ground swells coming in from the Gulf. So you'd go up, and when you'd go down, you'd see water in front of you. You wouldn't see land. And he was just loving it, man.
No, but this up here, Fort Livingston. This was the Confederate fort. But this is the closest they got there. So 300 men were stationed in here up until the end of the Civil War, and nothing happened. They stocked it, they armed it, they stationed them here. They were waiting for action, they're waiting for fights, waiting for the Union to try something. But this really was not a strategic area, so
Right.
Nothing happened. And then after the Civil War, they kept it garrisoned with one man. One sergeant stuck around. They had the U.S. government, U.S. Army stationed one sergeant in there, and he was there for 7 years, and then they figured, okay, that's enough. We don't need to do that anymore. They pulled him out. So this is Fort Livingston.
The other side.
And is this resedimentation? This is what they're doing right now?
This is sand being pumped in from offshore, possibly 2 to 3 miles offshore inland, to be lifted back up. I don't know what height it would be, but it's going to be at a plus elevation of sea level.
And then the whole island will be ringed with the riprap, with the rocks to prevent erosion.
It'll have some riprap in certain locations. Then they'll put the sand barriers up and plant the growth, the marsh grass.
Where the roots will actually hold the sand into place.
It'll hold the sand in place.
And then it'll become sort of like a nature preserve almost.
Pretty much, yeah. That's basically what they're trying to do. This is an inhabitable island. They won't have vehicular traffic on it. Just trying to get something to slow the storm surges from going.
So the
inland.
barrier island will be then a barrier once again.
It'll be a barrier island once again.
And waves of immigrants from France, from Italy, from Spain, from Canada, and later even Vietnam, settled in these waters to shrimp and to fish. This island was once a pirate stronghold. 1,000 pirates, smugglers, rum runners running rum, and slavers held this island in an iron grip. There was a civil war for it. And a few years ago, one of the worst oil spills in all of history happened just out there, devastating the shrimping industry. And 130 years ago, there was a twin island, the Grand Caminada. This island is essentially gone, wiped out, because the other fact of life for these barrier islands are the hurricanes. Not the drink, those delicious though they may be, that's more of a French Quarter thing. But the powerful storms that can wipe out everything in their path.
This David Kambalel Lemire from Grand Isle, and like I said, you see behind me, welcome to Grand Isle, but you see what's going on after this Hurricane Ida hit. I'm here to explain that.
All right, so what is going on with that particular island?
Well, you got Elmer's Island, you look it to the right, and what's happening, it was about 1,500 foot of beach. Right now we got about 500 foot of beach. It belongs to the state. But as you're coming into Caminada, this is Caminada Pass, and you could see behind me, right behind me, you could see that this pass was about 7,000 to 8,000 feet at one time, and now it's about 10,000 feet. So what's happening, the storm Ida came right in here, and as we stand, you can see the piers are destroyed. You had 13 to 14 feet of water that came straight across this island.
In 1893, a cotton trader named Louis Terrebonne was staying on Grand Caminada. He had a small shack, basically a little building right on the beach where he and some of his friends would stay to relax from their jobs in New Orleans. One Sunday, he was there alone. He walks outside in the morning, he looks out of the Gulf, and he sees a dark line, clouds in the far distance. He doesn't really think anything of it because it's just another storm. He goes back into his little shack and he makes himself breakfast, comes back out. Now the line is a lot closer. He gets a little worried, but he looks over and he sees all of the shrimpers from Grand Isle. They're moving towards the storm, towards the dark line. Well, he figures he's a cotton trader, he's not a fisherman, he doesn't really know the water, so it's probably okay. Goes back inside, relaxes for a bit, comes back out an hour or two later, and now the line of storms is much closer. Now the wind has picked up. Now the birds have changed, the clouds are moving, and all of the shrimpers are coming back, all at once. Now Louis gets scared. So he goes back into the shack and he tries to figure out some way to make himself a shelter. Tries to figure out some way to make his building more secure. But it is just a shack. This is not a fortress. He does have a few tools though. So instead of trying to nail shut the windows, nail shut the door, he takes the nails and all of the beds and he puts them essentially in a small pile and nails them to the floor so that he can hide under it. He goes back outside when he hears the wind roaring and the storm is right on top of him. This is not just a storm, it is a massive hurricane, and not just a hurricane, a very strong hurricane. This was a Category 5. This is as bad as it gets. This is as bad as it gets. So Louis goes into his shack and he hides under the bed, nailed to the floor. The wind becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. The shack begins to shake. The windows break. Water starts coming in under the door. He's 10 to 15 feet off the beach, and he's got water coming in under the door. For about an hour, he cowers in his building, hoping that the shack will hold, hoping that the roof won't fly away, hoping that the walls will stay still and stay strong. They don't. The walls collapse. They collapse over the bed that's been nailed to the floor. That's good. That's more shelter. Then everything dies away, almost instantaneously. The wind stops roaring, the house stops shaking, the walls, halfway fallen down, stop their trembling. Louis goes outside. He looks around and all he can see is devastation. The water is up to his doorway. He looks down the beach and he sees people running inland, running toward what he assumes they're going for, which is the church. The church is about 2 miles away, and Louis is not an athlete. He tries to figure out another place to go, another place that can give him shelter, but he knows he's not going to make it to the center of town. He knows he doesn't have the athletic ability or the stamina to make it all the way to the church, because this is the eye. He's always heard about it before, he's never seen it. This is the eye. This is this dead part in the absolute center of the hurricane, where there is a pause, where the wind will stop. But he knows it's just a pause. It's going to start again, and it may be even stronger when the eye passes. Right down the beach, there's a very large cypress tree. Louis sees that tree. He sees a boat that has been lifted by the storm and thrown into the branches of the tree. He sees rope. He runs into his shack. He grabs a thick oilcloth canvas coat, wraps himself around it, runs for the tree. He climbs 15 feet up into the tree. and he ties himself to the trunk, using the boat as a shelter, as a windbreak, trying to give himself some protection from the storm. He barely makes it in time. By the time he gets to this tree, gets up in it, and has cowered behind the boat and tied himself to the trunk, the storm has begun again in earnest. Louis sits there, hunched behind that boat, trying to protect himself from the driving rain. For how long? He doesn't remember. An hour, maybe two. The boat held. The tree held firm. At some point, Louis falls asleep, completely passes out. He wakes up, and the storm has passed. It is pitch darkness, but the storm has passed. Louis was alive. The people on the Grand Caminada realized the storm was coming. When the water began coming in under the doors, they retreated into their attics, only to have the storm disintegrate the attics around them. When the eye passed, they ran for shelter. They ran for the stronger buildings. Those that made it to the church survived. Most of the other survivors survived in trees, but only those in the branches, not the ones that tied themselves to the trunks before the water rose even further. Those that climbed survived. Those that didn't. The King of France, though wealthy from the sugar trade, had a very serious problem. By the 1760s, he's losing a war with the British. The Americans call this the French and Indian War. The British call it the 7 Years' War. It's the same war. The King of France knows he will be defeated, and as part of the surrender, he will be forced to give up all of the French lands in the New World. To prevent the British from getting their hands on Louisiana and New Orleans, and all of the resulting sugar taxes, tariffs, and profits, the King of France gives them away. He surrenders to the Spanish in 1763. Spain takes control of all of Louisiana and New Orleans. Only after this transfer is complete does France surrender to the British, and the British take what's left. And what's left was Canada. And that is how the French colony of Canada became part of the British Empire, now the British Commonwealth, but they don't get Louisiana and they don't get New Orleans. There were a large number of French Canadians that did not want to live under the British Crown, so they left. Some of them left voluntarily, many of them were completely forced out. A huge number of them came from a region called Acadia, and the Acadians ended up settling in the swamps around Louisiana, where they became the Cajuns. And that's where that comes from.
The Gulf is advancing, the water is rising, and the ocean is moving inland. There is no sugarcoating that. The mighty Mississippi River was channeled into one path. All of the outward moving water pressure has stopped. So 100 years ago, the salt water began moving in. Slowly, but inexorably, what was fresh water is now brackish. What was brackish is now saltwater marsh. What was saltwater marsh is now Gulf of Mexico. The land is going away. The sea is rising. But the greater problem is that the land itself is sinking, and it is sinking fast. One football field-sized piece of land is gone every 100 minutes. The bayous are expanding, the land is eroding, and the Gulf is advancing.
So, Jim, pirates.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. You were expecting somebody to look like Johnny Depp in Landers clothes and really look different than everyone else.
I suppose.
Well, you're going to be disappointed because most pirates didn't want to stick out, because if they did, the penalty for piracy is death. During the time of war, however, pirates aren't about to miss a meal, so they become what's known as a privateer. A privateer has what we call a letter of marque, which gives them permission to raid ships of the described enemy of the country that gave you the letter of marque.
Okay.
This is legal piracy. However, you were mandated never to hurt anyone when you took their ship, nor were you attack neutral vessels.
Jambalaya, crawfish pie, filet gumbo. Son of a gun, we're gonna have big fun on the bayou. All right. Man, you gotta come down to Lafitte to see me, man.
What exactly is Lafitte?
It's about 16 miles south of New Orleans. We're actually the seafood capital of the world.
Really?
Yeah, it's a beautiful area. There's a few spots I want you to see. It's a land loss situation. When we talk about land loss, we look at an environment like this, and our way of thinking is not just land loss. This is a hatchery. This is where everything starts out at. Freshwater shrimp, crabs, even alligators, snakes, everything starts out in a closed environment where they can survive and learn everything before they get to the open waters. And this happens also in the saltwater marshes, where there's less trees, but enough vegetation for shrimp to go in and lay eggs.
So all of a huge amount of the seafood and the entire ecosystem is based on this land where they have to grow, to lay their eggs and to grow.
Absolutely, it's a hatchery, an incubator. It's
everything.
It's a preschool from to learn what to eat, what not to eat. It's what to hide from. It all starts in these closed-in environments. Moving on over here, also associated with the Louisiana state tree, the gray stuff you see hanging from the trees is called Spanish moss. For many years, this stuff was used for making furniture as a stuffing material, mattresses, chairs, pillows, etc. It caught on in the automotive industry. Henry Ford used it in his car seats. In fact, in the long-term part, he was able to perfect it and learn how it could be longer lasting and stronger, which involves killing it. So when it's alive, it's grayish silver. When it's dead, as you can see a little further in, it turns black. Actually, very, very strong. Especially when braided, to use to make rope and archery string for hunting. When it's dry and it's real thick, it's real straight. Henry Ford mixed it in with real horsehair, which confused a lot of people, and he used it in the car seats of his vehicles. Once doubled over, almost, I don't know how to braid, and I'm proud of that, but twisting it and pulling on it is pretty strong.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people in New Orleans and probably elsewhere feel a sense of doom and feel like that there is not much they can do about what's happening here.
Yeah, definitely.
Stronger hurricanes, more frequent hurricanes, and they just don't know that they can help in any way. But to me, this is one really easy and frankly tasty way that you can help by eating oysters and recycling the shell.
Because it really does help. This can have a very large, measurable impact on coastal Louisiana certainly, and on other parts of the country as well. That is, you're right, easy and tasty.
Easy and tasty.
Cheers. The river carries 600,000 cubic feet of water per second. All of that water carries a huge amounts of dirt, mud, and silt. All of that silt was dumped into the Mississippi Delta over millions of years. As the river spread out, the water slowed down, the mud and the dirt settled down into it. This settling of the dirt and the silt created the small rises, the small islands, and of course the barrier islands that actually form the barrier between the Mississippi Delta and the Gulf of Mexico. The water is very muddy. And it always has been. The very first description of the Mississippi River by an explorer was wide, muddy, full of logs. It is too thick to drink, and it is too thin to plow. This is the mouth of the Mississippi River. Not the way it is, but the way it was. The river itself is far too muddy to form a large natural harbor at the mouth. Instead, the water split up into multiple channels, which then split up into smaller channels, and the river primarily diffused into the Gulf of Mexico by way of bayou and swampland. So the mouth of the Mississippi River hundreds of years ago actually looked like swampland, which is to say it looked like the rest of the Louisiana coastline. And if you didn't know what you were looking for, you weren't going to see it. For this reason, it was 177 years between the European discovery of the Mississippi River and the founding of a European colony on its shores, New Orleans. This tree was here when New Orleans was founded. We don't know exactly how old it is because they don't want to do a core sample drilling into the middle. Instead, they estimate the age by the length and the girth. The limbs themselves are 160 feet long, while the trunk is 35 feet around, putting the age at around 300 years old.
All right, Mayor Kerner, why don't you tell me a little bit about what's going on with Lafitte, Louisiana, this small town?
Yeah, right now we're coming from the worst storm in our history, the most powerful storm that ever hit Louisiana. They've dubbed this really our Katrina. It devastated our community. 35% of our residents lost their homes.
And you're talking about Hurricane Ida from last year.
Yeah, from last year. 35% of the population lost their homes, many of which were priced out of their insurance. That all of their life savings, all their equity was in that home, and now they're looking at that family wondering how they're going to put a roof over their head, how they're going to feed their family. Their trim boats sunk. So look, this storm devastated Lafitte. Now, we've made a lot of progress. We've just voted the cleanest city in the state in our district. Coming from Hurricane Ida, what a triumph. And it's really a testimony to the resiliency of these people. But even that being said, I mean, people have never been more hurt than they are right now.
Why is that? What's going on?
So look, you have to go back in time a little bit. 1970, I think Lafitte flooded one time in history. 1929, that was from the Mississippi River. Never had a flood event from the Gulf. 1980s, we had one flood event. Now you look at fast forward to 2022, and we're flooding numerous times a year. And a lot of people attribute that to climate change. And look, that may be that more intense storms and more frequent storms, but that's not what's killing us right now. It's federal government projects and policies. When you put the largest pump in the world right north of a community of about 7,000 that protects over 100,000 people, and you direct the largest pump in the world pumps Olympic-sized swimming pool every second.
An Olympic-sized swimming pool every second is being pumped
directed at us. There was no public forums when they built that. In fact, somebody in the Army Corps flew down, and my father was a mayor at the time, and I don't know if it's a colonel or a general, but said, "Look, don't worry about this pump. We got you in 100-year protection." And you can read about that in the New York Times, where they had a meeting in home, and my dad went, and he said he saw that we were in a levee, a proposed levee, and he said, "What do you suggest we do?" He said, "Relocation." He said, "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking about relocating your jaw. New York Times reported about that." But look, long story short, that they did this with no public forums. There was no public forums in Lafitte, the place that would be devastatingly affected by it and are being affected by it. And they left us out the 100-year protection, and it wasn't 100-year protection that was 20 miles away. It's 100-year protection that's 2 miles away north of us.
So you're saying that the 100-year protection, what you're talking about is the levee systems themselves that would protect the land against a 100-year storm.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. High enough and strong enough to protect from a 100-year storm. They built one about a mile and a half north of us that connects with the largest pump in the world. So everything which is 3 parishes at least, that everything inside the levee protection that is protected. All that rainwater, if it's a historic rain during a hurricane, all the water gets pumped to us. So they were sandwiched between 2 surges, one from the south wind and one from the north. Now the Army Corps says it doesn't add that much water on us because their models show that it doesn't. On a perfect sunny day, it might go into the Gulf beautifully, right? It might add a little water. But when you have a strong south wind, like a Hurricane Ida, it's going 100 miles an hour. That water's not going to
200 miles an hour.
That water's not going to, but over here about 100, 150, 140, I don't know. But that water is not going to venture off in a beautiful way into the Gulf of Mexico. That water's coming against that surge and that south wind. What it's going to do, it's going to build up. And where does it build up? It builds up in the places closest to it. It builds up on us. So we were sandwiched between two surges. And now the federal government just approved the diversion that's south of us. That's the largest diversion in the world. Not only do we have the largest pump in the world that's pumping at us. We have the largest diversion in the world. It's going to add more water. So when a south wind comes and a surge comes, it's going to add more water on us.
How far away is that diversion?
That diversion is going to be less than a mile south of us.
And a diversion is, correct me if I'm wrong, a diversion is the taking the water from the Mississippi River and putting it out into the
There's
bayous.
two types of diversions: freshwater and sediment diversion. Sediment's a little bit better, but it's a sediment diversion. It's going to take the lower end of the Mississippi River. It's essentially poking a giant hole in it through a system and pumping that water in and trying to rebuild the land. Now, and then the oil companies, when they blocked off the Mississippi River, right? You couldn't. Well, let me backtrack. When they blocked off the Mississippi River, the Mississippi River would fed this land. It's the newest land in the United States.
Sure.
It totally stagnated it, which probably could have lasted for another century or two. When you had the oil companies who came in and dredged tens of thousands of canals from the Gulf to our doorstep, right? It gives a road of all this salt water that comes into these freshwater brackish marshes that destroys all the land. So it doesn't take a Hurricane Ida to come in, a giant surge. It takes a tropical storm to get that water in and start doing its damage.
So they dredged tens of thousands
at
of
least.
canals?
At least.
And these are the ones that started off being 12 to 15 feet, maybe 20 feet wide, but from erosion now they're 100.
Oh, they're massive.
100, 200 feet
You
wide.
can look at the satellites, and it's night and day where they're just getting massive and massive and massive. And in some cases, the land that made it a road, now it's a lake.
Yeah.
And look, I would like for me or you to go try to dredge a mile or even an acre of land in the wetlands and see what kind of opposition we get, and they'll make us repair it. And for them to give a immunity, really a past state of Louisiana administration giving Bobby Jindal giving them immunity to not repair it, has caused the greatest crisis in Louisiana history.
We're losing a football field of land every 100 minutes. Is that correct?
That is correct. And in Hurricane Ida, we lost in about 12 to 14 hours. We lost about 70 years worth of land that it took to build. And look, a lot of that because the storm was so dangerous, but a lot of that's that consistent salt water through those surges. We had 7 surges last year, right? They didn't flood us, but they had 7 surges that raised the water, put that salt water that weakens the estuary, weakens the marsh, weakens the coast. So when it makes it primed and ready for Hurricane Ida to come in and destroy it, and that's what it did. You know, really, the common denominator to Lafitte is that all of our problems didn't come from us; it came from bad government decisions. And the reason why I say that, you know, we are suffering for the betterment of everyone around us. So the pump right north of us that's killing us is protecting 100,000 homes. Great for them, we're suffering for them. The levee protection to the north, now to the east, and now they're raising that, and now to the west that they're about to implement. Where's the water going to go now? It's going to pile up on us. Now it protects them, but Lafitte suffers.
Yeah.
The diversion that may or may not, but may build back land in 70 to 100 years and may turn the tides for the fight for the coast. Well, that's great, right? But it's killing us. It's adding more water on us. The tens of thousands of dredged canals by the oil companies, it fueled our nation. It led to a lot of people getting work and being able to feed their family, which is a wonderful thing. But who's suffering? Us. So it's a point where I'm pleading to the federal government that understand that you took a part in our struggles. You took a part in this human suffering. I would even go further and say you contributed to it. Now come and try to reverse it. And look, they're wasting. We were one of the only communities, and not to be long-winded, but we were one of the only communities left out of any kind of Hurricane Ida emergency funds. Right, we were left out of emergency supplement. You see Grand Isle, who I love, and it's all people, but it's further south of us, a little less people than us. I'm happy for them, and I think Grand Isle needs to stay here just as much as we do, but they just got $122 million. And here's an area that's being destroyed by the government they love, and they won't bring a penny. And can you imagine the amount of money they've spent in hurricane recovery? Our school alone was flooded 5 times. I mean, millions and millions of dollars. They were willing to spend 10 times when the camera's on and times get tough, and being reactive and being proactive and stopping the human suffering. We're doing a one-time payment that would prevent us from flooding, and it will save them millions and millions of dollars.
So what you're saying is it would be cheaper than to put the policies and the money into place to prevent these types of things from flooding your schools and this entire community, rather than coming in every single time it floods and trying to fix the problem again without addressing any prevention.
Yeah, look, without a doubt, you know, it's a reactive. They're being reactive instead of proactive. They spent millions and millions and millions of dollars. Our high school loans were probably likely going to cost over $20 million, especially with inflation right now, especially with the way construction is. We had hundreds and hundreds of homes that were destroyed, right? We had mud 4 foot and lower feet even higher than that throughout the whole area. And you had to get large machines, hundreds of large machines to dig it, dig a drainage system that was compromised. All the things cost a massive amount of money, especially during disasters. And
the protection line is a mile and a half away.
yeah,
And you could have been put within the 100-year storm system.
it would have saved the money. It would have saved the money. And right now, the storm system's rusting, where it would have been put into use and saving homes every year if they would just went a little further south to us. Look, it's horrible. And not only doing that, now with flood risk 2.0, they're gonna make they're gonna push our insurance, flood insurance rates. They're gonna skyrocket in 10 years. It'll go up every year for 10 years. They're looking at over 1,000%, right? And what it does is, I like to compare it to the Trail of 1,000 Tears, right? They didn't want those Native Americans there. They had them at gunpoint and they forced them out. But in this case, you have people that lived here for centuries. A lot of their life's work, a lot of their savings is in their home, is in their equity. They're not trying to come in and buy these people out for what it's worth. They're trying to drive down their property values, leave them with nothing, and force them out. And it's such a horrible plan, because if they decide, look, I want to sell, I want to go to higher ground. Okay, I agree, we need to go to higher ground. Well, the person that's buying it is not grandfathered in, so they get that 10-year rate. So now the people that even want to make the smart decision to move to higher ground, they can't sell their home,
Right.
not for anything close to what it's worth. So they're essentially driving down, without the guns and marching, they're driving down these people's property values. People who have lived here since before Louisiana Purchase. People that they didn't put guns to their heads, but they put a large pump in the world right north of them. They're putting a diversion right south of them. They let the oil companies get away with killing their our historical protection, and they're trying to force these people out with nothing in their pockets. And it is incredibly unjust. It's incredibly immoral, and it needs to make it even more glaring. We are more protected than we were last year. We're more protected than we were 5 years ago, right? We're getting state investments for levees. We have more homes elevated than we've ever had. And you know, they're not taking into account elevated homes. They're not taking into account flood protection structures. So if we put in a levee that we're putting in, that the only storm in history that would have overtopped it, and only topped about 10% of it was Hurricane Ida. And they're not going to take that last year, and they're not going to take that into account for flood insurance. It just doesn't make sense. The more we protect it now, that doesn't matter now. It's a plan to shift the whole country up, and in our cases, after what they did.
This community is 200 years old. It has survived fires, floods, disease. No, I'm sorry, not two. I'm sorry. This community is well over 200 years old. It is much older than this country. It has gone through fires and floods, disease and war. We've got French, Spanish, Italian,
We're the first
German,
Asian settlement
Vietnamese.
in the United States.
The first Asian settlement in the entire
Filipinos.
United States, the Filipinos. And then one thing you can't fight against is the advancement of the salt water and the diversions.
Yeah, and you can't fight against it when the federal government's on their side. You know, it's a situation where right now, I mean, all of our struggles can be attested to bad government decisions.
What
Every
happens
single
if
one.
none of these change? What happens if none of these decisions change?
If none of these decisions change, then this community will be lost. I mean, look, I'm going to fight to the end for this community. I love this community. I want morale to be high. I think that we do have a brighter future. We have more hurricane protection on the way than we've ever had before, something we've been fighting for 30 years. We're going to have more homes raised. We have stronger gas lines and stronger utility lines. So we have a lot to look forward to. I mean, we are making great efforts in the fight to exist. However, if nothing changes and this insurance rate's not reformed, if the federal government doesn't put in an investment down here, then we'll be racing its time. And I feel like I have to do my people a service by saying that.
I think you're doing a very good job. Mayor, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Hopefully that did justice.